The Second World War was a 6-year war that left an estimated 55 million people killed or harmed as a direct result of the fighting. It also cost the nations of the world a combined $1 to $2 trillion in order to fight for what they believed was right, making it one of the costliest wars in the history of mankind. That 6 years of warfare helped create the world we know today. What many people don't think about are the 2 decades that preceded this historical event, stretching from the end of the First World War all the way up to 1939 and the invasion of Poland war. It was here, in this 20-year span, that events were laid out for the buildup of the greatest war in human history. What really started the domino effect of events that led up to the start of the war was the end of another war. When the First World War ended, a devastated Europe was left to pick up the pieces and try to move on. The Allies had won the war, leaving Germany and its allies in defeat. Britain and France, along with their allies, sought to make sure that there would be peace in Europe and that Germany would not start another war anytime soon. The peace conference that was to take place didn't happen for at least a full 2 months after the official ceasefire was ordered for World War I in November 1918. The conference was delayed into January of the following year. But it seemed that France and Britain were out for blood, looking for someone to put the blame on for the war, and it took all the way until April for the official peace treaty to be signed.
The fighting had devastated huge areas of northern France and nearly bankrupted the economies of both Britain and France. The Versailles settlement insisted that Germany pay reparations. Huge sums were to be paid to pay off the debts of France and Britain, repaying money loaned by America. The sums were unimaginably large, crippling the German economy. Versailles imposed military humiliation upon Germany, insisting the Rhineland, that area of Germany adjacent to France, be demilitarized. The German army, the largest in Europe, was to be cut to 100,000, not enough to defend Germany, let alone start a war. The army was to have no modern weapons, tanks or aircraft that had revolutionized World War I. The German Navy was to have no U-boats. If Germany refused to pay, if she rearmed, if she moved troops into the Rhineland, the only option open to France and Britain was to restart the ghastly horror of the Western Front, to renew the war, fought to end all wars. Versailles was weakened from the start. The British thought the settlement unfair and unrealistic. The French that the punishment of Germany had not gone far enough. That the only punishment of German breach was war, total war, made international relations a high-risk game, made for a bold individual gambler.
Germany was given this treaty and thought it was extremely unfair and even preposterous. Leaders of Germany did not want to comply with it at all, but started to comply nevertheless. It seemed the result of the First World War and the treaties that followed only helped fan the flames for another war in the long run. The biggest result of the First World War was the peace treaty created and signed into action that put the blame on Germany, along with many other forms of appeasement, only provoking Germany even more after losing the war.
There's, I think, no question that the unsatisfactory ending of World War I with the Treaty of Versailles, written and negotiated as it had been, definitely contributed to fighting again 20 years later in Europe. It was not only unfair but incorrect, that the causes of World War I were more complicated. But due to placing all the blame on Germany, not only was some land taken from Germany, which had long been contested between the French and the Germans, but also that Germany was saddled with these massive reparations which they actually only paid off in this decade, that essentially saddled Germany with massive economic problems from the 20s. And so if the goal is actually to bring peace to Europe, it had the unintended consequence of putting Germany into a permanent economic mess that made it very easy for Hitler in 1933 to appeal to the sort of lack of fairness and then get elected. And so in that way, the Treaty of Versailles set things up for Germany to sort of be really upset about the outcome of World War I, but the long-term consequences, so that Germany couldn't envision alternatives, unfortunately. And so there are other factors too, of course, but definitely that's one.
The large fines that were placed on Germany through the Treaty of Versailles started to combine with the economic depression that had hit the world. Both of these factors only helped to further the idea that something needed to be done within Germany in order to create a better economy for the country and turn things around. It seemed that Adolf Hitler was the man to do just that. Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany because of his appeal to his fellow countrymen, and they bought into Hitler's National Socialist Party to help ease the major problems of Germany. Hitler's election to office was also due to the fact that he was an adept psychologist, a resourceful agitator, a tireless worker, and a clever showman. Hitler knew how to sway the people by his creative and inspiring speeches. Hitler was able to exploit the conditions in Germany.
Germany has these massive debts to pay. Many Germans believed, I think falsely, that they could have won World War I. Of course, just like Americans, some still think that we could have won Vietnam. There's this lingering doubts, right? And Hitler will appeal to these sorts of sentiments of Germans, to their German pride, to their sense of what their belief in their greatness, their belief that they were essentially didn't really lose World War I, but were stabbed in the back by the Jews. Hitler is able to effectively play on really a millennia of anti-Semitism in Europe effectively, even though Jews did not cause the Germans to be defeated in World War I. Everyone likes scapegoats because rather than taking the blame themselves, they can blame someone else. In this case, a minority population of under 1%, but also who had been hated by Germans and other European Christians and Catholics for centuries and centuries. And so combining with appealing to German nationalism, combining with anti-Semitism, combining with the economic desperation of the times due to Germany's crises, but then the global depression in the 30s, Hitler is able to exploit essentially a population that votes him into office, right? I mean, it always, I like to point out that democracy is maybe better than many other alternative political systems, but if the people elect a jerk, right, or a fascist, well, democracy isn't perfect because people aren't perfect. So
Hitler was a politician of action and did just what he said he would do. He promised to abandon democracy. He claimed it the enemy of strong leadership, and at the first opportunity proceeded to set about that very destruction. Already, as Hitler took power in 1933, the system of reparations had collapsed amidst the world economic crisis. For 13 years, reparations had been a major issue keeping the war alive. Germany had lurched from financial disaster to disaster. Any individual German's money troubles, the great inflation and the huge unemployment of the 1920s were laid at the feet of Britain and France. The Germans felt robbed. The French swindled, but the Germans were trying not to pay. The British saw reparations as part of the problem, feeling their abandonment would bring about a European economic recovery. A run on banks in the early 1930s had caused the payments to be written off and had discredited the German government, helping bring Hitler to power. The 13 years of fighting over money helped destroy the Versailles Settlement. Hitler presented the German people with one big idea: the destruction of what he called the Slave Treaty of Versailles, and to once more make Germany a power. Hitler's policy from taking power in 1933 was a succession of acts, each a line-by-line deletion of Versailles. Germany lost territory in the east where huge areas had been won from Soviet Russia. These gains of what in later years would be called Lebensraum, living space, were taken away and used to create a new nation, Poland. A high-minded and noble idea was that states should be decided by nationality. Therefore, the Polish had a country of their own, rather than living as minorities in Germany or Russia. But in drawing the new map of Europe, the principle of nationality was forgotten at Germany's expense. The new Poland was given access to the sea, and in the process, millions of Germans became a minority in Poland. The new Czechoslovakia was to be given defendable borders and included millions of Germans, the Sudeten Germans, and a minority of disaffected Slovaks. Contrary to the basic principle of nationality, German-speaking Austria was forbidden to unite with Germany, lest the two countries combined their strength. Versailles created a Europe where Germany, still a big, powerful country, was bordered in the east by weak, smaller countries with whom Germany now had scores to settle.
Labor and raw materials. The geopolitician's job was to transform Hitler's ambition to control these elements into cold, hard reality. On their map, our planet is neatly divided into land and water. Water forms 3/4 of the Earth's surface, land only 1/4. And in that 1/4 of the Earth's surface lies the world's wealth, all its natural resources. Manpower. Control the land and you control the world. That was Hitler's theory.
After Hitler was appointed Chancellor, he set out to gain complete control. Hitler got rid of one of the bodies of government, thus getting rid of political opposition in one aspect of German government. He also suppressed all opposition against him.
The office of Chancellor was combined with that of President. Head of government became head of state. The army swore personal loyalty to Adolf Hitler, and a parliamentary democracy became a dictatorship.
But Hitler's control over his own country and government wasn't the only thing that he wanted. Hitler sought control of land surrounding Germany, taken from the country at the end of World War I and the creation of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany and Hitler felt it was their right to take back this land. It was all to create wealth and resources for the country of Germany.
The desire for wealth and power gained through military force in Japan, Italy, and Germany. All three of those nations see that as legitimate, and that's part of common at the time, these sorts of social Darwinian ideas that the strong should rule, that it's legitimate. So too, Germany deserves to sort of expand because its neighbors are weak and deserve to be under the thumbs of the Germans. So too, the Japanese feel that way about other Asian peoples, Chinese, Koreans, and others in their hemisphere.
Hitler did as he promised. He said he would end unemployment, and did so, implementing policy that was a German New Deal, a recovery program that was every bit as successful as that of Roosevelt in the USA. Money was pumped into the economy through vast public works, directly and indirectly creating jobs, raising the level of demand and productivity throughout Germany. In March 1935, Germany reclaimed the Saarland. Yet another chapter of Versailles and the post-war settlement unraveled. The Saar was a small but economically important area of Germany adjacent to the French border and was seized by France at the end of World War I. The Versailles Treaty promised that after 15 years of French occupation, the population of the Saar could vote to choose French rule, German rule, or independence. It was now 2 years into Hitler's regime. Any Saarlander knew that union with Germany meant joining an aggressive militaristic dictatorship, that it would be a democratic vote to end democracy. The people of the Saar were as educated, as intelligent as any European people. The issues at stake were fully and openly debated. The French made a strong and attractive case for retention of their rule. The voting was free and fair, internationally monitored. 98% chose Germany, chose Nazism, chose Hitler.
Here, in utmost secrecy, the hardening up process, building up Hitler's army and his industry.
Tell the world we have no raw materials, and never let them see what goes on. Day after day, night after night, month after month, year after year. We must have the world's most powerful club. Forget ours. Forget working conditions. Forget how to think. Forge the club of blood and iron. Let the democracies talk about freedom. No freedom here. No labor unions. No overtime. The Führer tells you where to work, when to work, how long to work, how much your work is worth. Forge the club of blood and iron. We have a sacred mission. Today we rule Germany. Tomorrow, the world.
Here was the Italy that Mussolini took over in 1922. And almost his first act was to tell the Italians they were the rightful owners of Corsica, Nice, Savoia, Albania, Tunisia, Ethiopia, and a land corridor linking it with Libya. Later on, he had an even bigger dream. The old Roman Empire as it existed nearly 2,000 years ago, to dominate all the lands adjoining the Mediterranean. As for the Japanese, they had some ambitions too. By 1920, they had grabbed off Formosa, Korea, and the southern half of the island of Sakhalin. Their dream: Manchuria for raw materials, China for manpower. Then a triumphant march through Indochina, Siam, Burma, India, the East Indies, and on through Australia and New Zealand. And in the north, all they claimed was that part of Russia east of Lake Baikal. That was to be the new order in Asia.
Japan is seeking to dominate the eastern half, at least of the Pacific. Or the western half, I guess, depending on where I always get confused. They're part of the Pacific. When you look around the Pacific Rim, what countries might intervene, might be able to prevent the Japanese from really doing what it wants to do? It's clear that the United States is the only nation that could potentially threaten the Japanese. America has been trying in the late 30s and early 40s to use diplomatic and economic pressure against the Japanese, but the Japanese, are expansionistic. They don't want to negotiate away their desire to continue to expand. And so I think the Japanese military leadership, which is also the political leadership, makes a calculated gamble that a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet is in their best interest. And in the short run, it was. So America's in the way. And so Japan boldly attacks. In the long run, it's obviously a mistake. But nevertheless, you can understand the logic, even if you don't agree with it. I think it goes down to their premise. Their premise is expansion. Who will get in the way of their expansion? The USA. Therefore, the USA must be knocked out. Right? That's their intention.
Here's the Germany Hitler walked into, and here's what he wanted. First, Europe under his complete political or economic control, leaving Mussolini a share of the loot if he behaved himself. Then the drive to the east, through the rich oil lands of Iran and Iraq, into India. Another push south through Africa. Then from Dakar, jump off to meet the honorary Aryans who were to move in on South America through the Pacific. At the same time, start across from the Scandinavian countries, to hook up with his buck-toothed pals coming over from Siberia, to join in the conquest of the United States.
It was time now for the Nazis to start crossing borders. It was time for Hitler to put his plan into action. And what was he waiting for? He was waiting to soften up his victims, keep them from uniting. For the softening up process, he sent his agents all over the world disguised as tourists, students, and commercial travelers. Payoff men like Ribbentrop came too, to bribe, threaten, and form local fascist parties such as de Grelle and his Rexist party in Belgium, Henlein in Czechoslovakia, Seyss-Inquart and his National Socialists in Austria. Satisfied they had created the right sense of fear in the world, the Nazi leaders were now ready to strike. The hour had come. It was time to start conquering Eastern Europe, according to the plan of Hitler's geopoliticians. It was time to win the domination of the heartland. Who would the first victim be?
As a result of World War I, many new countries were created, but at the cost of other nations. The German Empire was such at the end of the war that it had land taken away from it and now sought to take it back. And more. Austria and Czechoslovakia were two countries put on the chopping block. Austria was to be the first country to fall to the power of Nazi control when German troops marched into the country in March of 1938. With relative ease, the country was taken, and the world was shocked that Germany and Hitler would do such a thing. In response to the attacks from Germany, the leader of Austria asked Britain and France for immediate action and aid against the incoming German forces. But instead, they did nothing.
Well, it begs the question, right, why would one country intervene in the affairs of another in the first place, right? It's easy to blame Britain and France for not stopping Germany when they might have in 1938. But another way to think about it is that why should the British and the French do so? There is this notion that great powers have a right and a responsibility to sort of police their region. That's the way the United States also acts. The League of Nations was unfortunately weak and incapable of doing much. When the British, with their French allies, appeased Germany by allowing Germany to take Austria, which wanted to be annexed, but also to sort of annex Czechoslovakia, which did not want to be annexed. The British and the French were doing what might be seen as, at the time, brilliant, because no one wanted to have World War I repeat itself. World War I was the worst war in modern history. Why would we want to go to war? And so perhaps sacrificing the Czechs and the Slovaks on the altar of German fascism seemed like a wise idea. In retrospect, Hitler wasn't content, and so now we know that appeasement was a big mistake. But at the time, I think the primary reason it was done is because it was just 20 years after World War I, and World War I was so damn awful that people, especially the British and the French, including them, didn't want to do it again, at least if not their material interests were directly threatened.
The leaders of France and Britain, desperately striving to avoid war, flew to meet the jubilant Axis leaders at Munich. On September 29th, in return for Hitler's guarantee of world peace, Chamberlain and Daladier prevailed upon Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland without a fight.
It is the last territorial claim I have to make in Europe. I have assured Mr. Chamberlain, and I repeat it here, that when this problem is solved, there is for Germany no further territorial problem in Europe. We want no Czechs.
Within 6 months of declaring that he wanted no more territory anywhere, he violated the Munich Agreement, marched in, and took the whole of the Czech state, though he had specifically promised, "I have no further interest in the Czechoslovakian state. That is guaranteed. We want no Czechs."
Hitler ordered the taking of the rest of Czechoslovakia, and again he was allowed to get away with it. Basically, it was a simple fact that no country was ready to start another war after fighting in the First World War 20 years ago. Hitler was able to get away with his crimes. In order to try and keep peace, however, Britain and France vowed that they would come in and help if Hitler tried to take more land. Poland was the third country to be placed on the chopping block and was sought after by Hitler. But in order to create a safety net down the line, Hitler first created an alliance with Russia and Stalin, thus creating multiple benefits for Germany.
And on August 21st, 1939, the world was set on its heels by the announcement of a treaty between the Russians and the Germans in which they agreed not to fight each other.
What that does for Germany is, of course, famously secure his eastern border. Germany is in Central Europe, and as in World War I, just like in World War II, is confronted with the potential danger of a two-front war. That was one of their problems in the 19-teens as well. It's no secret that the geography is an important component here, and so by signing this non-aggression pact with really the arch enemies of the fascist Nazis were the communists. The first group that the Germans went after in 1934 were, when Hitler came to power, were the communists, and then the labor unionists and the socialists, right? And so it's amazing, right, that he signs this treaty with Stalin and the Soviet Union. It's a treaty of convenience. It's a non-aggression pact, as you said. It's not an alliance of friendship, but simply we agree not to attack each other, which in a sense should be what every country accepts as a matter of course. But by doing that, it allows Hitler to protect his East, and so he can focus the power of the German military on the West, and quickly, sort of in 40, after defeating Poland easily, move into Scandinavia, into Western Europe, the fall of France quickly after. It's contributed to Germany not having to worry about its eastern front.
With a safety net to the east and the war front on the west, America was sitting across the Atlantic wondering and waiting to see if Europe would break out in yet another war. The country was vastly split on whether the U.S. should enter if war broke out in Europe, but wanted to stay out of it as much as possible, only helping by way of aid with supplies. There were multiple reasons why America was trying to stay out of what looked like an impending war.
First, of course, is what business is this of ours, which is a reasonable question to ask. As awful as war might be in other places, and even if there's a good and a bad side, why intervene? America has a long history of, going back to Washington, of non-intervention outside of North America, and then outside of the Western Hemisphere especially.
In the event of war in Europe, I think we should stay out of it entirely.
If war breaks out in Europe, I think that this country should heed the advice of its first president and avoid all foreign entanglements.
This time America should keep out, and I know I will.
If war breaks out in Europe,
we simply did not want to understand that our individual and national problems were, and always will be, dependent upon the problems of the whole world. And we had individual and national problems to worry about, plenty of them, just as Germany, Italy, and Japan had. But we faced them in a democratic way.
I think World War I, being so unsatisfactorily settled, and America never even ratified the Treaty of Versailles, even though Wilson pushed for the League of Nations and negotiated the treaty in 1919, left a lot of Americans worried. And so why, again, join this war? 110,000 Americans died in World War I. Why are we going to sort of fight again in Europe? It's the same people fighting again. What business is it of America's? That seems like a reasonable way to think in, say, 1936 or 38. I think also, Americans are divided because some Americans are pro-fascist. Some Americans are pro-Nazi. It's easy to forget that in the late 30s and even in 1940, there were hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans who were openly pro-Hitler. And that Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator, was calling out FDR for being the greatest threat in the world, not Hitler. Where did this sort of pro-Hitler sentiment come from? Some of it might be admiration of a strong military leader, which I can see, although I'm not one of those sorts of folks. I think others are American anti-Semites, and they like, in fact, what the Nazis are doing to the Jews in Germany, and wouldn't mind it happening in America either, right? And so they might not be as outspoken, but nevertheless, there's some of that. Congress refuses to let German Jews into the country. when they're trying to get out in the late 30s, which suggests, again, that anti-Semitism is in fact normal among the American population. And so how do you measure these different aspects? Obviously, it's a combination of factors, but FDR is ahead of the curve. He wants into the war much sooner. He sees it as in America's interest, but also in the world's interest. Most Americans do not until America's attacked directly. So I think there's multiple reasons why. And then the last one always is, the ethnic identities of, there's a lot of German Americans, there's a lot of Italian Americans, and there's a lot of Irish Americans who don't really want to support the British.
War had already begun and dragged America into it the hard way when the country was attacked by the Japanese. War had officially started in Europe when Hitler ordered his forces into Poland, taking it by force. The night before Hitler ordered a full invasion of Poland, he told a few men to cross the border before the real attack on September 1st and create scenes where it looked like Polish forces had attacked German forces along their mutual border. Hitler used that fake excuse as a reason to dignify his invasion of Poland the next day. Hitler wanted a reason on the national stage to get away with getting what he wanted from Poland.
During the last 2 weeks in August, the German armies moved toward the Polish border, where they assembled 70 divisions, many of them armored. From a military standpoint, the Poles were hopelessly outclassed by their predatory neighbor. They managed to mobilize barely 30 divisions, made up of infantry or horse cavalry.
Britain, not merely the British government, but the British people had declared war. War on Hitler and everything he stood for. The democracies did have convictions for which people were willing to stake their lives. Unprepared? Yes. But that didn't matter. For they finally realized that what was being threatened wasn't just the integrity of Poland, but the integrity of free men everywhere in the world.
What tragedies, what horrors, what crimes has Hitler and all that Hitler stands for brought upon Europe and the world. It is upon this foundation that Hitler pretends to build out of hatred a new order for Europe. But nothing is more certain than that every trace of Hitler's footsteps, every stain of his infected and corroding fingers will be sponged and purged, and if need be, blasted from the surface of the earth. Lift up your hearts. All will come right out of the depths of sorrow and of sacrifice. Will be born again the glory of mankind.